Thank you very much for coming, everybody. It's a larger group than I knew existed, but it's very nice to see everyone. What we result of our schematic design phase, that clearly means the project isn't finished. There's a lot of things to be further developed. There's questions to be answered. There is details to be done, etc., etc. But we have another phase in which all of that will be answered. Mm-hmm. The project is in a state where it gives more than a fair idea what the quarter will end up looking like and of what sort of neighborhood we are planning. I'll just dive straight in. We've got a site on the edge of the city, a site very much in the context of a city that is in flux, a city that is also changing. Here you see the relation to the center of the city. This site with the yellow line around it is our site, with in red kind of dotted the way you currently enter the site along existing roads. But while we are planning our site, the city is also planning the future of the city. The infrastructure around the site will change. Our site will flank the fourth ring road that the city is planning, and therefore also the relevance and the prominence of this site is expected to change as a result of the city's efforts. That is the site, a sort of pastoral void in the city, a site with a very stark slope in the city, a kind of wonderful green oasis in the city, with various steepnesses and various slopes along the side, but almost never straight. This is, to cut a long story short, the plan we have devised. It's a plan of a checkerboard pattern of different size blocks, which in a way follow the contour lines of the site in rows, but which in a way are, in terms of morphology, a slightly larger version of the type of development that has emerged around. It looks messy, it looks like a form of a certain amount of anarchy, but it's actually highly ordered and highly structured, but structured by the heights of the site. This is the thing in plan. So what looks very diverse, very varied, and even somewhat messy in the third dimension is in fact extremely ordered in plan. And here you see the planning on the site. It spreads all across the site, it's all over the site, but actually the buildings occupy only 30% of the site, which means that 70% of the site is left open and also represents the hilly sloping character of the site. The overall pattern is a lot of small buildings, but actually exists of three more or less continuous clusters, which also means that the whole development can be built in phases. This is a plan we propose in the context of the morphology of Tirana as a whole, and I think it is interesting that once you draw it in the context of the city, you almost have to draw a red line around our development to single it out. The fact that you have to look for it in the overall context of the city. We read it as a sign that it blended into the city. It blends into the city, that you see that you have to single it out, and that you also see when you make a model on a larger scale, where actually not only our plan but also the city around it has been built. So it looks like a typical development that makes use of the hill, that there are courtyards, but the buildings are different in height. They start at a different height, so one building looks over the shoulders of the next, you could say. That is our site, and our site is in a way built on a slope, but of course that slope has to be prepared for the buildings. One of the things we've done in the design, and the projection is very light, so I'm not sure whether it's too visible, is that we have flattened certain parts of the site with a difference of 3 meters in height where the buildings are, and where there is no buildings we've more or less left the gradient as it is. Here you see it in more details. That means that the ground floor of each building is in a way half sunken and half exposed to the outside. And we have used those typical sections where in a way one end of the building is below ground, the ground floor at the other end is fully exposed. We've in a way used that sectional principle to also use the ground floors wherever the building in a way directly borders the neighboring terrain to put functions, either commercial and also apartments there as much as possible, but also people who live there in a way can make use of the courtyards, open the door of the apartments and actually walk out onto the private courtyards. So those are the sections. Those are a series of sections, the way that would work, with blue commercial space and red apartment space, which in a way we've done, and we've found a lot of extra square meters, not by making the scheme higher and therefore the courtyards darker, but by simply making clever use of the ground floors as much either for commercial or apartment space, because we also think that the public space and the ground level and the street life in the whole plan will benefit from that. This is in a way a calculation that proves that we make the required density without, in a way, excessive height. This is the artificial part of the plan, a series of flat spaces connected to each other. You can't see anything here, but invariably those flat spaces are the spaces that give access to the cores of the buildings, to the apartments. They are hardscape, they are paved, and they're also the spaces that give access here to the commercial spaces around. This is also pretty invisible, but this is a section all along the spine across the whole plan. So in a way, on the same level, on a single contour line, all the hard spaces are connected, and you can cross the entire plan by almost staying on the same level. This is a model where you actually then sometimes go between the buildings, sometimes pass through the buildings. Here's another one closer by, always double height when you cross a building, so the passages remain light. And then there is a number of connections between the hardscapes where there is actually a considerable height differences to be bridged, which we've done in a number of ways. This is simply a cut through a building with a long stair. This is an intersection between two buildings where one becomes an arcade, and this is actually sometimes an entire block. Again, adjoining buildings and one of the buildings carved out, and sometimes an entire block is lifted off the ground on pilotis so that those connections can be wider and you pass underneath an entire building. This is a number of things in model, the whole thing, again the passage, looking at the slope. And this is a central passage. This is the steepest part in the plan going from down the hill, up the hill, following the contour lines as steps going all the way up, partially underneath the buildings, and this is a night shot of the same thing. This is of course a relatively novel way of town planning. In a way, you don't know whether you're looking at a series of smaller buildings or at a single large structure. But we've in a way done a reality test where we've treated it as much as a regular urban plan. The whole thing is surrounded by a ring road that gives access to the whole periphery of the plan. Only certain parts of that ring road need to be paved or asphalt. They're the parts that give entry to the parking garage. You go around. Then there is a series of roads together with the hardstave actually allow vehicles, emergency trucks, delivery vehicles to cross the whole site and touch every single building. Near the entrances of the parking garage, adjacent to the ring road, there are a number of drop-offs for taxis with a minimum walking distance to the center. And those are the car parking garages. A large sliver of horizontal car park further up the hill, and a smaller car park below the hill, adjacent to the points of entry of the ring, which means that the car on the whole, apart from delivery vehicles, ambulances, etc., the car on the whole, the site on the whole is car free. And in a way drop-offs happen at the end, which means that all the connections between the blocks are pedestrian, which also means that living on the ground floor is therefore completely feasible, whereas if it were a site heavily populated by cars, that would clearly be a different story. Anyway, garage with the entrances and the layout of the cars. Also the garage kind of follows the contour lines of the site, hence its particular shape. The parking, in a way, concealed. The slope is very cleverly used to conceal the parking. You enter the parking, but you never walk along the facade of a car park. Car park here is shielded in the hill. Then there is a commercial space to bracket it on the left, and the cars on the edge of the site more or less invisibly disappear underneath the project, leaving the space above pedestrian green. Residential layouts. We have designed this particular checkerboard pattern for a reason. It is a series of quite small buildings that are smaller than you would expect of a normal residential development. Of course, ultimately this is 100,000 square meters. It's a very, very big development, but it doesn't look big from any angle. I mean, it wasn't meant to be given the nature of the site, and it also wasn't meant to be given the nature of its neighbors. So this is a series of small buildings, but the buildings can be small because they are made interdependent. That is the way it works. So sometimes cores are in the middle of the blocks when they're big enough. Sometimes they're at a corner giving access to both blocks. Apartments, we have them in multiple sizes, but on average they are grouped around 120, 90 and 60. Clearly, because of the pattern, there's an enormous differentiation of apartments, and not much repetition, so sizes vary. Sometimes they're a bit bigger than 100, some a bit smaller, a bit bigger than 90, etc. But on the whole, this is the realm of sizes that we have portrayed. So that you can't really see it very well, but that is a small apartment. There's a middle-sized apartment with an axonometric, and that is a large apartment of 120 square meters with 3 bedrooms and a long loggia. And this is one of these apartments that straddles over 2 blocks, where in a way you live in a flat, but your flat isn't a box. You know, we think out of the box, so people don't always have to live in boxes. I mean, as they have, well, yeah, but 2 boxes isn't a box. But that's maybe a longer discussion when something stops. Okay. But that is the way the corners between buildings are dealt with. So here you can go from one building in another. The other thing is that the corners more or less kiss, and with a screen, and that there is two loggias touching, and actually what the two boxes are actually two boxes in the sense that each apartment is a box. Loggias, sometimes in the middle of the blocks, more often at the corner of blocks to solve the corners like this. Here kissing apartments, and then here a loggia, the way it would be done in an apartment that travels from one block to another. Many of the blocks intersects, and this is the facade we have designed of the blocks. There is two sizes of openings, one for the loggia, which is somewhat larger, and one essentially for a big window. So it's in a way, in terms of a facade, an extremely repetitive scheme. The only thing that is not repetitive is the way the windows are placed in relation to the interior, depending on whether there's a bedroom, a living room, or something else behind it. A single element that makes up for the So this is on the ground floor. This is the way that works. Square window in a square bay, to the left, to the right, to the top, to the bottom. That's the variation. So each single window has 4 positions within which it can land in a structural bay. The division of the window is always in 4, but the cross stays in the same place, and because the windows move, the cross looks in a different place. The point of drawing it like this was that we made it seem, even though it's clearly a 21st century building, it's rational, it's in part very industrial, but that we made it look very, very vernacular, or almost folkloristic, almost like somebody had been drawing it without a computer, or even with too much to drink behind its things. But we dealt with it in 2 ways. Around the perimeter of the site, we have not varied the color. We've kept the buildings white, in a way just as many of Kontakt's new projects and developments are white plaster. But once you enter the whole development, actually each courtyard becomes a different color. We have done it in such a way that once you enter the thing, colors appear, and we've chosen not to necessarily give each building a different color, but give each courtyard a different color. So that is the space that is leading and not the object, as you can see here. That's the way it looks, and somehow the changing of the colors very informally, the color, that's in a way the white in the front and then the colors of the courtyards behind. This is in black and white only with the windows, where in a way it's an enormous amount of windows, it's an enormous development. This is a large-scale project where you in a way see the windows dancing in different positions to also make the thing look friendly and genuine. And this is the way it works. Since it's on a slope, buildings look over other buildings. They look down the valley towards the mountains. And what we've also, it's one of the things we are proposing, is that some roofs are accessible because the higher adjacent building has a core in a particular corner. That means roofs are accessible, and we propose that with the roofs, which aren't all, there's actually a limited number of them, we actually also propose a certain amount of green on the roof. That maybe the green we take from the site by building on it sort of reappears on the roof, and in terms of plan, we might keep the same quantum. That is a view of the courtyards. You see the white on the perimeter and then the colours of the courtyards on the inside. Also the kind of villas, sort of illegal structures to the south of the site on the top of the hill. This is a close-up. This is a photograph with the existing buildings Here, the perimeter in white with only the windows colored, and then the courtyards looming above it. And since the site slopes, in a way, when you're at a larger distance, the project will never appear white. You will always get a glimpse of the interior when you are looking at the project remotely. And I have talked long enough, so that is in a way, in short, a summary of presentation. We have books which contain a lot more than what I've shown, and a drawing set, and that's it. Thank you.